Let's say that you like the reference for a painting, but you want to create your own unique color palette. I received this portrait for a critique by Osni Foxglove, and she's got this really nice atmospheric vibe going on, but there are some inconsistencies. So I'm going to show you how to do this while maintaining your harmony, hierarchy, and also creative freedom, because there's a lot of photo editing and adjustment layers you could throw on at the end, but we want to have full understanding and control every step of the way. And I'm going to do this intuitively at first, and then I'll show a much more structured process that really breaks it down. Now, to create more atmosphere for your palette, we need to compress the values and the colors closer to each other to be within a tighter range. We could say that this equals this. So I'll put a little equal sign right here, and then this blue will equal this black. And so that means that all the values that are spread out in here are going to be compressed inside of this tighter range. And I've already gone and made a color palette for both the reference and the painting, but what you need to understand now is how all of these colors and values are being affected by the new parameters that we just set. So we're going to say that this is the darkest value in the entire painting. Remember, this came from a black shadow value, so the relationship of this to this is the same. But in this painting, we have a big discrepancy. So I want to make sure that there's no value here that is darker than my new blue shade. Otherwise, I'll be fracturing the relationships and therefore the impression we're trying to create. Now, aside from these shadows, which I think are too dark for our parameters, I actually really like how she's done the hair. We have a whole variety of values and colors, but they're all in the same family. And the reason why this works is because you could take any one of these values and compare it to other important values in the painting, and its relationships will still hold up. The shadow of the hair is darker than the shadow of the skin. It's darker than the sky. So one of these factors is value, and another factor is the hue. This is more red than the flesh tone and more red than the sky. And it's also arguably more saturated, so that's the third factor. This is more saturated than the flesh. So as long as you can maintain those relationships, then you have room to play inside of your parameters. But because I've changed the darkest values, I'm going to help bridge the gap to transition from that dark blue into those reds. Now I can more easily transition this in. And I'm going to be a bit sloppy here as I eliminate any unnecessarily dark values and help connect the blue to the red. Now, because we went up one value with our brightest shadow in the hair, we can probably go one value up for the flesh as well. That way, these two stay about 2 values apart. And before I put this down, look at the inconsistency. This value shouldn't be brighter than our brightest shadow. So this is breaking a relationship. So the main idea here is that even though you're changing the shades, the relationship from one shade to another stays the same. Now, keeping these parameters essentially keeps you inside of a sandbox, but you can change the relationships themselves. These things don't have to be in perfect relation to each other. So this is where I like to start if I'm going to change all the colors, as I just maintain the overall hierarchy and I keep things closer together. And then if I want to branch out, if I want to break away from those relationships, maybe point to something else, draw more attention, maybe I throw some lighter blues into the hair, you can then make those deviations while the rest of your painting is neatly intact. You could come back to the eye and intentionally go down a value from your original parameter to really draw people's attention there. So you want to do that after you've already established a solid base. So now we're going to rewind the clock, and I'm going to show you how to manually create your own color palette for a painting. It's going to get a lot nerdier, but the things to remember are setting parameters based on light and shadow, finding base shades that can approximate a light on an object or a shadow, and then the 3 factors for the relationships: value, hue, and saturation. And I think it'll be helpful to use a 10 value scale for control. The first thing that we want to do is to find the extremes of our value scale. We want to find our darkest value and our brightest value. So now we know the entire range of values from this painting, which just happens to be the full range from 1 to 10. And we want to break this down further, and the best way to do that is not going by object, but by going through light and shadow. So we've already found the darkest shadow. What is the brightest shadow? So if we look in here, we have light shining on her forehead, but in here, this is all in shadow. This seems pretty bright to me. What about her shirt? this in here. And now we know that all of our shadows have to be inside of this range. And now we can do the same thing with our lights. So now we know that all of our lights fall inside of this range. There can't be any other values that would be darker than this, because this is the parameter that we just established. From here, we can start looking at more specific objects. So let's say H for hair, F for flesh tones, and T for top. We can even add S for sky. We've already found the darkest shadow in our hair, and the brightest shadow might be this. So this is the range for the shadows in the hair. We can't go any brighter than this. For our lights, we already know that the darkest light is this, and the brightest value in the hair, there's actually some pretty powerful specular highlights, so we've got a pretty full range actually. But I think I can break this down a little bit better by looking for a color and value that would properly approximate all of the lights in the hair. Something in between these. I like to err on the more colorful side because it's easier to gray something down than to add color later on. For the flesh tones, we do have some dark shadow in here, and the brightest shadow could be this. Okay, it's going to be this, which I'll put right here. And now the darkest light. And interestingly, this is actually darker. So I'm actually going to put this off to the side. And the brightest value is going to be this, which I'll put right there. Maybe this actually needs to come down one. And because this is such a big range, I want to find a nice approximate value, which I think will be neatly in here. For her top, everything is in shadow, so this is going to be within a very limited range. So this is our palette. Not only have I found the brightest light, brightest shadow, darkest shadow, but I've also found approximate values for base lights or base shadows as needed. And by erring on the side of more colorful mixtures, I've also found the most orange colors, the most blue colors in this scene. Now that we understand the palette, we can make changes. And the first thing that we want to do is look at this from a broad overall perspective. Remember that this is the darkest value in the painting. Osni was trying to lift up the values into something else, not only changing the values, but changing the colors as well. Let's say that this is going to be the darkest shadow in the entire painting. And let's say that's a value 8. But if we're going to do that, then we need to revisit this value scale here, because this was our brightest shadow originally, and now we're going to have a potentially new brightest shadow, which could be something like this, which is about the equivalent of what was our darkest light before. I'm going to put a black line here just to make sure that we know that this is shadow. So essentially this inside the reference photo is going to become this value, and this inside the reference photo is going to become this value. But I can keep this value here because I do need to make a transition between blue to red. Sometimes it's easiest to do that by not changing the actual value, but changing the color instead. So I will have half of this be blue and the other half be this red. And this we don't need to change because this is still brighter, more orange, more colorful than our brightest shadow. So even though we've scaled this up, this doesn't actually have to change. These could stay just as they are if that's what we want. Now if we come back to our overall lights, this is now our darkest light. So I will put that right there. Next, we can move on to our flesh tones, which I'm going to include as the eye, but this is very dark. And if we have this down here, it actually ruins the relationship between this, because before these values were side by side with each other. This value and this value were the same. So if we're going to keep the same relationship, then this needs to come up into here. And we don't have to go with blue, but let's keep it simple and stick with blue here. So I'm going to put this on the side for now. This is the brightest shadow for the hair, and this is the brightest shadow for the flesh. When we compare these relationships, we can see that there's a significant value jump between them. You can see how these are much closer to each other. So I'm going to take this and I will elevate the value, and I'm going to lean it a little bit towards some saturation because we already increased the saturation of the hair. I think I'll go even brighter, something like that. Feels like a similar relationship. So coming back to the original palette, you can see some of the differences. This is now opened up to here, and this was our base shadow value, which is still here. We need to move this up to capture something in between, something like that. And now the darkest light should fit somewhere in between these two. So I'm going to bring up the value and keep the saturation. So now the shadow stops up there. It is possible that this base light will need to be moved up as well as this base light, but let's see how we do for now. We're mostly focused on lifting up the values to create this more atmospheric feeling. Now for this top, this is our darkest shadow, and we know that we've been leaning towards a brighter value and towards blue. So why don't we take this, make it brighter, and lean it towards blue, which in this case is actually going to go back towards gray. So I'll put that right here. And we don't have to change this if we don't want to. But if we do want to maintain the relationship of this, then maybe we brighten the value just a little bit to stay ahead of this one. And another correction I need to make is to take this and bring this up here. So I'm making these tiny mistakes because I really never do this. It's a lot less structured and more organic, but I'm really maintaining all of these relationships inside my mind when I change the color palette of a painting. One of the reasons why I've been hesitant to move these is because we haven't dealt with this extreme yet. If we want to pull this down, then these would likely stay pretty much where they are, right? If we lift this up, then these would go up. But if we bring this down, then these would probably stay where they are, maybe even come this way a little bit, depending on what you're trying to do. And I think I want to do that. And I'm going to move this into more of a color, and its value is going down just a tad, which now means that this needs to change unless we want to intentionally change the relationships. Maybe we don't want the cloud to be the brightest thing in the painting. Maybe we intentionally want this to be the main focus. So you could even take this and push this even further so that the highlights on the skin really stand out. So all up until this point, we were trying to maintain the relationships, but now we can confidently make deviations, creating new relationships to direct people's eyes in the direction that we want them to look. And I could probably do more to adjust these things. I think I'll add some pink into this, which is again just going to make it more gray. And by making this more gray, these richer reds will stand out a little bit more with their higher saturation. Okay, so these are my final corrections. All of my relationships are still intact despite a couple intentional deviations. I've mostly just compressed the values and leaned my shadows towards blue as they get really dark, which helps my lights be more warm and my shadows more cool. And now we can begin painting. And it's good to be a little skeptical of the palette that you make because you might find some issues. For example, I found that my brightest shadow was a little too bright for what the painting called for. So just keep in mind that it's not really until you see the values and colors working together that you'll have an easier time verifying which values and colors are working properly. Now that might make you want to just throw yourself at the painting without planning anything in your palette. I would not recommend that because then that's a lot of trial and error and you might veer off into a direction you don't want the painting to go. So I'll actually focus more in here to get a painting started as my real guideline. From this alone, I can tell that my lights are going to be warm, my shadows will be cool. I won't be getting too dark for this painting, but I can get pretty bright. So these overall parameters can really help inform me on what all the other colors and values need to be. But I hope you found this very helpful. I certainly enjoyed doing this, and Osni made this so easy for me with such a beautiful painting and already great color changes. So I really just got to tweak a couple things, but I really feel like she did the bulk of the work in deciding what colors were going to work really beautifully together. So she's done a fantastic job. Doing these critiques has been fun, and I am still open to do critiques. So check out the link in the description if you'd like some coaching on your artwork specifically. Until then, happy painting.